Hello? Hi everyone, there we go, much better. Welcome everyone. So I guess judging from the number of people in this room, all of you have lots of questions about the Arpaio case, and that's what we're here to do today, is answer all your questions, and just to give you a little bit of background on the case, talk to you about what happened at the last few hearings, and then to hear from you all. My name is Alessandra, I'm with the ACLU of Arizona. We are part of the team that actually brought this case to court. The ACLU of Arizona became involved with this case in 2008, which seems like an eternity ago. And we are co-counsel with the organization MALDEF and with the law firm of Covington and Burling. We're the only organization, though, which is I'm proud to say, is the only organization that's here in Arizona that's representing the trans class. So the case, and I know a lot of you will probably have questions about this, the lawsuit that we originally filed, that we became involved in 2008, was a lawsuit seeking to essentially stop these discriminatory practices by the sheriff. 2008 was a really, really terrible year from our community. The sheriff was descending onto predominantly Latino and Yaqui communities, conducting immigration raids and stopping and detaining and arresting people based solely on their immigration status. And so we filed a lawsuit like we typically do as an organization to stop these practices that we believe violate Latinos' constitutional rights. We represent the Latino motorists in Maricopa County. The lawsuit was eventually declared a class action lawsuit. So as attorneys for the plaintiffs, we're representing pretty much every Latino motorist. So if you drive a car and you're Latino, you are a representative of this class. So that's just a little bit of a quick background, because I know, a lot of times when you're listening to the news coverage and reading about this case, that we don't really spend that much time kind of getting into who is doing what. But you'll hear about that today. So in addition to the ACLU, MALDEF, and the law firm, the Department of Justice is also part of this case. They are what's called interveners. So what that means is essentially the Department of Justice had a separate lawsuit. It was a similar lawsuit that raised similar issues. And because our lawsuit was resolved and addressed a lot of those similar issues, the Department of Justice intervened, and they are basically part of the team that is ensuring that Arpaio complies with the court orders, which we will get into very shortly. What does all of this mean? So I am actually, we wanted to have this event because we wanted to give you a chance to hear from the individuals, the plaintiffs, the organizational plaintiffs who made this case possible, this lawsuit possible. We could not file this case had it not been for two of the women that are sitting up here, actually, who you'll get to meet. Lydia Guzman, who is a representative of Somos America, who was one of the organizational plaintiffs in this case, and Angeles Maldonado, who is also now is a member of the Community Advisory Board, which was appointed by the court and the judge in this case, but she was also at the time very critical and instrumental in documenting these abuses. And when I say documenting, I mean we needed videos and affidavits and really building trust in the community to encourage people to stand up and bring this case against the sheriff, because we could not have done it without those individuals. And Brenda Munoz-Furnish is one of the attorneys in the case. She's a staff attorney for the ACLU of Arizona, and she has been tasked with reading and going through the thousands and thousands and thousands of pages and boxes and all of the documents that we have been reviewing over the past several years related to this case. So that's just a very, very quick overview. I really want to thank you all for being here today. I know it's it's Thursday evening, and I appreciate you taking the time from your time with your family to be here today. So I'm going to start off by turning it over to Lydia, who's going to talk a little bit, provide a little bit of background in this case of basically how we got here.
Thank you, Alexander. I think this is on. So first of all, I'm going to go back before the lawsuit was started. And the lawsuit, when it was...
talk a little bit, provide a little bit of background in this case of basically how we got here.
Thank you, Alexander. I think this is on. So first of all, I'm going to go back before the lawsuit was started. And the lawsuit, when it was, I see that folks, can you hear me okay in the back? Okay, great. So the lawsuit was started thanks to a lot of the work of a lot of the organizations. Now, when Somos America was formed, Somos America was really formed a coalition of organizations really for immigration reform. And what we're talking about, a coalition of faith, youth, labor, many different organizations. I believe there were over 30-something organizations. And so everyone, that came to the table to advocate for immigration reform, we also we started meeting, and we were the same folks that did the march back in 2005, right? And so this is a mega march where we had 250,000 people in the streets. And so we had a really good coalition of lots of volunteers. So at some point, Arpaio was, he was pressured by folks in the community. Pressured because he was starting getting letters from business owners saying, oh, guess what, there's folks that are undocumented, you have to come and round them up, they're standing in the street corners. And there was a lot of controversy over day laborers hanging out over in Pruitt's in front of a furniture store right on Thomas and like 32nd Street. And so as that was heating up, the sheriff's office decided to make it almost into a community confrontation. We started listening to a lot of folks and letters in the community. And it became a political hot button, especially when, right after 9/11, it was a political hot button to go after the immigrant. And so let's recognize the fact that Arpaio, before he's a sheriff, he's a politician. He has to worry about getting re-elected. So this is something that resonated to him, and so he wanted to resonate to his voters. And so what eventually happened is he responded to that by saying, I'm going to do community raids, and I'm going to make our streets safe again. And so to respond to the day laborers, he started doing community raids, these immigration sweeps in the community. Now, as far as I'm concerned, day laborers are hanging out in the street corners, standing, waiting for a contractor or someone to pick them up to offer them a job. But the way that Arpaio was doing this is he was stopping people at night while they were driving. That doesn't address any day laborers, right? And so we started seeing, and that he was stopping folks that were Hispanic, and then that's where everything got started. He started stopping folks that were Hispanic, and so then he set up a hotline. We were so offended by this hotline, a hotline to report, and they were all over his vans and his buses. And then he started with this hotline. If you want to report illegal immigration, call this number, right? And so we said we're going to start our own damn hotline. So we started a hotline called Respeto, right? And so folks could call to see, to report if they were victims of what we, identify as racial profiling. Now, let me just give you a little description of how he would do his raids. He would, in the beginning, Arpaio would announce the raids by bringing the media in. So he would, in the beginning, announce to the media, maybe 2 days in advance, that he's going to do a raid and he's going to set up in this corner, and he would bring in these big vans and these big, it was like a circus. And there was all kinds of deputies with the posse members, and there was about 200 officers or so that would go out into the community, into like a maybe 3 or 4 square mile area, and he would saturate them. And and he would have them ready to, he would probably release them out about maybe 11 o'clock in the day, ready for the 4 o'clock news. And so what would happen then is, by the time the 4 o'clock or the 5 o'clock news came around, he would have folks displayed there with their zip ties on the floor so he can show the media, look what I did, right? And so, we started documenting some of these cases. And let me tell you, it was difficult at first, and it was heartbreaking, because we would see a lot of the faces, we would see a lot of the families that would come to us. We would set up our own shop, our own operations right next to where they were, so we can see who the folks were, and then also meet the families that would eventually follow some of the patrol cars where they were processing them, the folks over at their operations center. They would set up a mobile command center, an operations center, and it looked like a circus with lots of media, with lots of folks screaming. And then it came a point where we had pro-Arpaio folks that were chanting and screaming, yelling at the folks that were trying to document, and it just became very volatile. It was heartbreaking. But I'll tell you what, the task of going out and looking for some of the stops and to document it was quite interesting. And I credit a lot of the work with Angeles and other volunteers from Somos America. What we did is, in the beginning, we would actually set up a grid of where we knew the boundaries or the parameters were of these operations, because he would announce it to the media. So we knew exactly where we needed to set up volunteers. And when we would hear on the radio, because we became that elaborate, we started buying scanners, and we would listen to where the stops were so we could dispatch our own volunteers to go out and document. And sometimes our own volunteers fell victims to the abuse of Arpaio's tactics, and they tried to stop us from documenting, from taking pictures. So it became again volatile out in the streets, not only at the mobile command center, but then with us. And before I turn it over, I'll tell you what, this task, even though it changed over the course of some of the years, it finally came to the point where Arpaio stopped announcing to the media, because we were alerting also the public, and the public was, we had less folks being detained as a result of us not only doing advocacy work and education, but also getting information from folks. So Arpaio got keen to that, and I'm gonna stop, I know, but we got keen to that, but from the early stops is where we got the majority of our clientele, so that we can, turn them over not only to the ACLU, but also share this information with the Department of Justice.
So let me just to put it into context. So this is 2008, so it's the height of what sort of the Depression, right? I mean, this is when the economy was struggling. This is when he realized and recognized that by vilifying Latinos and Mexicans in the press, it would score him political points. And so much of that information that was collected is what ultimately became the evidence that we needed to bring the case forward. I also want to say, just also to put it into context, this was 2008, 2 years before the passage of 1070. So these practices became the so-called model that the legislature was purporting to replicate statewide with the passage of 1070. They used Arpaio as the model and as the sort of the impetus to pass 1070.
Correct. And I just also want to add that Arpaio then had a weapon that he no longer has. An agreement that he had then called 287G, in which the immigration allowed him to enforce immigration laws, of course, but he used it. That's why it was revoked.
And the other sort of item that sort of came forward, and just the reality that came forward during the trial, is the fact that when you are stopping Latinos with the stated purpose to check their immigration status, in a county where 30% of the Latinos, in a county where the majority of Latinos are U.S. citizens, what ends up happening, and what did end up happening, is that a lot of these cases that Lydia and now Alkin were documenting were stops of U.S. citizens, of legal permanent residents, of people who were here lawfully, and who were being stopped and subjected to these practices simply because of their national origin and ethnicity.
And it was bound to happen. When you release 200 deputies out in the 3 square mile, you expect them to come back empty-handed. When they're told to, this is an operation, and they did come back empty-handed, and that's why, we have those claims.
So fast forward, we'll turn it over now to Angeles. She's going to talk to you a little bit about her role as the member of the Community Advisory Board. So, we got a decision in there were several decisions. There was a big decision in 2012. Essentially, it was a decision the first time that the sheriff had ever been found to be violating the constitutional rights of Latinos. That important decision came down in 2012. And as part of that decision, the judge created and issued a series of remedies, of reforms, to begin reforming the MCSO and to stop these discriminatory practices. And that's where the creation of the Community Advisory Board came in, where there are 3 individuals that have been assigned to the board. Alkin is one of them, that are essentially the liaison between the court and the community. So I'll turn it over to Alkin now.
Thank you so much for the opportunity to be here to talk with you all. I know that many of us would rather be home having dinner with our families, but I thank you for ensuring that discrimination and racial profiling doesn't continue here in Arizona by staying informed and engaged. I want to share with you a little bit about my perspective as part of the Community Advisory Board and also a member of this community, and also as a scholar activist. But before I do that, I want to tell you a little bit about myself and my background in order to contextualize my experiences. My name is Dr. Ángeles Maldonado. I am from Mexico. I was born in Salvatierra, Guanajuato, and I came here when I was 8 years old because my parents wanted to provide us with better educational opportunities. And so in 2002, I graduated from Arizona State University with a bachelor's in Justice Studies and a minor in philosophy. And then I got my master's in public administration and most recently got my PhD in educational leadership and policy studies. But despite all of my education and my degrees and my research, I feel that the place that influenced me the most and where I have learned the most was in spaces of fear and resistance here in the community, in places like this one where community members organized and we learned a lot of different things about what it means to live and belong in Arizona. I learned about my identity and I learned about what it means to be an American. And so my research focuses on looking at the hidden curriculum in social movements. And I feel that we are still learning today what that means. You know, we are learning today what it means to belong. In 2005, we were exposed to a growing nativist anti-immigrant sentiment. And as mentioned, Arpaio paid attention to that and saw that he could become very popular by being anti-immigrant himself. And he has effectively became a symbol of injustice and a symbol of racism and legitimized racism here in Arizona. And we, later in 2007 and in 2008, we learned that driving while brown could end up in deportation. We learned that our families could become separated. But we also learned what resistance can look like. We learned how to fight back. And today here, and with cases such as Melendrez, we are learning and defining what it means to be on the right side of history. So the journey has been a long one. And I was thinking the other day that it has already been 3 years that I've been a part of this community advisory board, and 9 years since I have been organizing around Arpaio. And I say around and not against because I believe that our real problem is systemic racism and white supremacy rather than Arpaio himself. So what does it mean for me to sit in a courtroom surrounded by familiar faces? I feel a lot of different emotions. I feel excitement, and I feel like we have been climbing this big mountain, and a lot of us came through it with many different tactics. Some people told us not to climb the mountain to begin with. I see Sal over there. And some people, used different tactics. But despite the different ways that we took about this, I think the beautiful thing is that we were all united with the same goal of getting to the top. And for us and for many members in this community, getting to the top still means to see Arpaio in jail and to just see the MCSO held accountable. And so even though he has now been found guilty of civil contempt and there's not much that can be done with regards to criminal charges, I do think that there is still more work to be done, and I think it's up to all of us to continue to press forward. In the hearing on May 31st, we heard the judge say that the U.S. attorney actually does have the power to bring charges against Sheriff Arpaio, and so the Community Advisory Board has written a letter asking them to do so, and then also asking for a meeting. And so what I want to do today is just continue to encourage you to stay engaged. No social change will ever come about without our continued presence. We also have a survey that is in the back in case you want to write any comments about your experience with the sheriff.